Hi, we're in our high-tech post-production facility. A while ago, we released a Thanksgiving special for all those people who were at home bored on Thanksgiving. Well, we find ourselves once again in a situation where a lot of people are at home bored, so we're going to re-release our Thanksgiving special. Now, it comes with the caveats that you may have seen it before, and that it was a lot of material that we put together in a short time, so it's not all that polished. But if it can help you alleviate some boredom, we're happy to re-release it. Hi, we're not on the range today, we're at a campground, and I'll explain a little bit about why in a few minutes. Today's presentation is going to be in addition to the normal weekly content, not instead of. No, I don't want to say that. Start over. Hi, we're not on the range today, we're at a campground, and I'll explain a little bit about why in a few minutes. If I've done this right, today's presentation is going to air in the AM of Thanksgiving Day. And so if you're watching me right now, I'm presuming several things, such as you're at home by yourself, and or you're hiding from your relatives, and or you're looking for an excuse not to be tasked with some mundane task, such as, hey, can you do this mundane task for me? Can you wait till this presentation is over? Part of the reason why today's presentation is so long. I'm also assuming that you're not a football fan, or you're between football games, and put all those together, you're bored and looking for something with some level of entertainment. So here we are. Now this comes with a few caveats. Normally, the work we do has the goal first and foremost to put out useful information for citizens. Or if not useful, at least interesting information. And if not useful or interesting, something with at least some mediocre level of entertainment. Now that having been said, I've been told that brevity is the soul of wit, so you will often hear me say, in the interest of brevity, or I'm going to give you the short version. Today, we're not going to do that. I've also been told many times that no one wants to sit and listen to me yak. So I often try to keep the lecture segments very short. Yeah, today we're not going to do that either. But in doing that, there's some caveats that come with that as well. A lot of what we are going to do today is going to take place in real time, so I don't have the ability to go back and refilm certain segments. Also, given just the amount of material I want to cover, I don't have the time to refilm segments because I trip over words or say something stupid. So today, I mean this in all sincerity, you are going to have to put up with my Shatner-esque pauses and my speech impediment and whatever other stupid thing might happen. So with all of that, what are we going to do today? Several things, primarily three. First, we're going to talk about Dutch oven cooking. I'm also going to discuss 3-day survival packs, and I'm going to discuss a topic that I don't want to talk about, but I think it is important, and that's mass shootings. Now, if you think that's the interesting part, then by all means, skip ahead to the part where you see me holding an M1 carbine. Okay, if you're still here, let's discuss a little bit about Dutch oven cooking. I've done some black powder shooting events, gone to the Mountain Man rendezvous, you dress in the buckskins, camp in the teepee, cook over the fire, and I've done quite a bit of Dutch oven cooking, and I'm going to demonstrate some of that today. This part of what I'm talking about is going to happen in real time. In doing that, I have to make it as clear as I can that nothing I say should be inferred as any kind of tutorial. I'm only demonstrating how I do it. There's many different techniques. There's more than one way to skin a cat. According to the robot on Lost in Space, there's 27 ways to skin a cat. So even though I might say, you should do this and you've got to be aware of that, nothing I say should be taken as I'm trying to tell you how to do something. I'm not. I'm only demonstrating how I do things. That having been said, what are we going to do? Well, I'm going to bake a cake, and I'm going to bake some biscuits, and in the big Dutch oven, we're going to make a dish that I call ham and yam. That's self-explanatory, although there are other ingredients. Now, an anecdote about ham and yam. Long time ago, I had an ex-girlfriend, it wasn't my ex at the time, that I mentioned ham and yam, and she just burst out laughing. What's so funny? Now, I'll try to get her response. Quote, "'Cause it just sounds so stupid." You got me. Calling a dish something that's representative of the ingredients in it is stupid. Like peas and carrots is stupid, or Franks and beans is stupid, or a cheeseburger is stupid. No, that's not the reason she's my ex, but it's one of the reasons. Oh, and side note, Wilberforce, I'm not talking about you. You are the most egocentric, maniacal, lunatic woman I have ever known. But to get back on task, let's do some Dutch oven cooking. So in making our ham and yam, the first thing I have to do is get the range table out, wash it off with 409, and rinse it with water. I've done this. Then we have to assemble our ingredients: ham, bacon, yams, red potatoes, apples, and a pineapple. Pineapple goes with ham. But before we start opening packages and chopping up our fruits and vegetables and putting them in the Dutch oven, the next thing we have to do is get our charcoal going. Now, earlier I said I'd explain why we're at a campground. Normally, Dutch oven cooking is something I'd do in the field, but right now in the state that I live in many parts of the state, elk hunting season is in progress. And so I don't want to be out there bugging a bunch of elk hunters, and we also have certain laws in this state, such as I am prohibited from being in possession of a centerfire rifle in an area where elk can be hunted unless I have an elk tag for that area. Well, I didn't get an elk tag this year. So to avoid disturbing a bunch of hunters and to avoid getting undue scrutiny, we're at a campground. Now, here's my charcoal lighter, and here's my waterproof bucket, and inside this is some charcoal and a bunch of newspaper. So I'm going to take some newspaper and crumple it up and put it under my charcoal lighter. Different people will do things different ways. And I don't want to get so much newspaper under there that it chokes itself off, but I want to get enough that I can keep the fire going for a few minutes. Then I want to fill my charcoal lighter bucket assembly, one each, with charcoal. Remember, we're cooking something fairly big and it's going to take a while, so I need quite a few briquettes. Although that's probably too many. That looks about right. You can tell it's a real scientific measurement. And then we'll get this lit. And I'm going to hold it just like this for a minute until this really gets burning. Now, some people will complain that I'm doing this right here on the ground and that there's pine needles and I might start a forest fire. I'm not wandering off. I am here to monitor it. And with as much rain as we've had in the last few days, I really doubt that I'm going to start a fire. Now, let's go put our ingredients in our Dutch oven. So I've got my ham unwrapped, I've got my package of bacon open. This is just a bone-in ham. Some people will ask about spiral cut or pre-sliced ham. I don't really like spiral cut because it has a tendency to dry out, although the spiral and the pre-sliced can reduce cooking time. Now, on the subject of cooking time, when you're at home and you set your oven to 350, whatever temperature it is outside isn't going to affect your cooking time very much. But in the field, using charcoal and a Dutch oven, ambient temperature and wind can affect your cooking time a great deal. More about that later. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line the bottom of my Dutch oven with bacon. Remember I said we're not doing the short version of things, so you'll just have to sit there and be patient while I line the bottom of my Dutch oven. And I'm creating a base for the ham to sit on. And while I'm doing this, I'm getting more bacon out of the package. This might be a good time to point out that if the Batman had a paddle, like a cricket bat, that he used to hit bats, like shoo them off the computer in the Bat Cave, that it would be called the Bat. Okay, now once we've got this bacon in here, we'll just set the ham on top of it. Now the purpose of this is that the bacon will not only flavor the final dish, but if I don't get my charcoal just right and it burns some of that bacon, the bacon protects the ham. So now that I've got that in there, I'll put the lid on that, and I'll go check the charcoal and see how close that is to ready. And depending on how close to ready it is, then we'll start chopping up vegetables. Now, when I said some things have to be done in real time, this is what I'm talking about. Now, Dutch ovens typically have legs on the bottom of them, and those legs can be short and kind of pointy. And the problem is that when you put them on soft ground, those legs will just sink right into the ground. This creates the problem that instead of having ambient heat that's going through your Dutch oven from the coals under it, one of those coals touches the bottom of the Dutch oven, directly transferring that heat, and burns something. So what I typically do is jam the Dutch oven into the ground, move it, see where the legs made holes, put bark over those to elevate it a little bit off the ground. Now our charcoal's ready, and so I'll dump some coals out, and I'll make sure that they're not actually touching any of these pieces of bark, otherwise you get flame going, that's not what you want. Then I'll take some really high-tech tools here, move that charcoal around so it's where I want it, and you want to have heat under there, but not too much. Yes, I could have a trowel or something like that, but that would be just more stuff I'd have to bring into the field with me. So you get your coals spread out fairly well. And for a lot of things, even this would be too many coals. But with our ham protected by bacon, it's enough. Then I'll get a feel for where my leg is. Put that down on our bark. And we're okay. Move a couple of the coals so that they're more under the Dutch oven. Doesn't do any good if it's hanging out there. And then put the rest of our coals on top. For just about anything you cook with a Dutch oven, you want more coals on top than on the bottom. You need that heat to get in there, but if you have too much on the bottom, you end up burning something. Now that these are cooking, I'm going to get some more charcoal going. One of the things of any kind of cooking is to get everything to come out together, and that can be quite a skill. Timing all of that is tough. Yes, your mom always made it look easy, but it isn't. This time I'll use a lot fewer coals because now I'm firing this up for what we'll use to bake our biscuits. And while we're waiting on this charcoal, I'll mix up the biscuit dough and start chopping up our fruit and vegetables to go in with our ham. They don't require as much cooking time as the ham does, so we'll add those in a few. Now, here's where I have to point out one of the very most important things to have for Dutch oven cooking: a watch. I'm going to set the bezel on my watch so I know when I put this ham in, so I know when to add the fruit and vegetables. A thing about all Dutch oven cooking is there's a degree of unpredictability, and you get a feel for things after a while. When you first start out, you're going to burn stuff. So now we've got our ham baking, we've got some more charcoal firing up. Now I'm going to mix up the cake. Remember, the cake has to be baked and then have some cool down time, so we've got to get it going at the same time as other things. Now you'll see that I've got two smaller Dutch ovens here. One is some off-brand you can get at Walmart for $20, $25, and then there's something made by Lodge which costs about 3 times that. Why? The big difference is the Lodge's lid fits a lot more securely, and the Lodge is sanded inside and it's got a whole lot smoother finish than the cheap one. For most of the things you'd make, the cheap one's fine. If you're going to make something like a cake and you don't want to have to get it off the bottom with a chisel, you got to spend the money and get the Lodge. Now, in starting to mix up our cake mix, it starts with a stick of margarine. Now take that stick of margarine and I will grease our pan. I mean, I will get it really greased. You don't want that cake to stick. You got to get not only the bottom, but the sides. And don't go completely overboard, but right about the time you think you've got enough, put more in there. Then I'll take the rest of that stick of margarine and put it in our mixing bowl. Yes, I'll pick up the litter later. Now, this cake mix, if you're familiar with cake mixes, doesn't call for adding margarine. The only thing I have to add to it is water and vegetable oil and eggs. But I'm going to put margarine in there anyway, because I find that if I use my pastry blender and cut in this stick of margarine, then it makes a much moister cake. Don't even concern yourself with how many calories and how much fat is in this. If you do, it takes all the fun out of it. Now, remember I said I had to do things in real time and I can't go back and redo things? This is one of those things I was talking about. I have to put water in this cake mix, and I didn't put any water on the table, so I have to go get some. So, give me a minute while I do that. Okay, so now I got some water. Now you saw I put a stick of margarine in there. Something I sometimes use in the field is a can of butter. This is just like the butter you buy at the store, except in a can. Really handy. But now that we've cut in our stick of margarine, we're going to add the eggs. Interesting thing about the difference between a white cake and a yellow cake is whether you use egg whites or use the entire egg. The yolk makes it a yellow cake. I'm sure for some of you it's painful to watch how slowly and ineptly I do this, but such is life. Now we got our eggs in there, and we have to use a carefully measured amount of cooking oil. There we go. And a carefully measured amount of water. And our mixer. Once we get this all mixed up, we'll pour it in the Dutch oven. And there's an important thing to how you put it in the Dutch oven. And that is how much cake mix you can actually get in the Dutch oven will depend on your cake mix and the size of your Dutch oven. And you might not be able to put all the cake mix in there. What you don't want to do is, as the cake rises during baking, you don't want it to hit the lid of the Dutch oven. That'll tend to burn the top of your cake. Now in this case, given the size of my Dutch oven, and how much cake mix remains stuck to the bowl, and how much I want to eat before it gets baked, I can put this entire cake mix in there. And we're pretty good. Now we'll put the lid on this and see if our charcoal is ready. Also, an important thing that I won't make you watch is you got to clean this bowl out pretty much right now, or that gets stuck in there and it is very hard to clean in the field. So our charcoal's ready to go, and given the length and the bluntness of the legs on the Lodge Dutch oven, I won't have to set them on anything. On the ground will be fine. So I'll put a few coals out here, a few briquettes. And remember, it doesn't have to be very many. Spread those out a little bit. In baking something like your biscuits or the cake, you want a whole lot more briquettes on top than you do on the bottom. Put our Dutch oven right about there. Now some people will ask, why don't I just put the cake on top of the ham? A couple of reasons. One, I need a whole lot more charcoal on the top of that than I do on the bottom of this. Also, in a few minutes, I'm going to have to take the lid off of that to put in the fruits and vegetables. So stacking Dutch ovens, depending on what you're cooking, what you're doing, can be a great idea, but in this case, it's not. And that ought to do it. And again, I'll make note of what time I started this. Now, while our cake is baking, I've chopped up our fruits and vegetables and put them in this bowl so we can go add those to the ham. And depending on how long you want to cook it or how you like to eat things, you can chop your fruits and vegetables into different sizes. I'll take these red potatoes and just cut them in half. Now, as far as the apples, I leave those in quarters. And even though I leave the skins on, I don't leave the core in the apple. There are those who would argue that the core is the most nutritious part of the apple, and it may be. And when I eat just an apple, I typically do eat the core, but in a dish like this, especially when I'm going to be serving it to other people, I'll take the core out. Now, as far as our pineapple, yes, you could bring canned pineapple, but to me, that's kind of cheesy. And it's just fun to cut up a fresh pineapple. This time of year, getting a really ripe pineapple can be difficult. Now, this pineapple has a core in the middle of it, and I'll just cut around that. And the nature of pineapple being what it is, I'll leave it in bigger chunks. Not bad. Now let's go put this in with our ham. This is my Dutch oven lid remover, and this whole thing is a segment we have to do in real time. A very crucial thing is as I take this lid off, I have to make sure that I keep it balanced so none of the charcoal falls into what we're cooking. Then I have to set it over here on these pieces of bark so it doesn't get into the pine needles. Then we very carefully add our fruits and vegetables. Then another thing we do is we take some bacon and we cover those vegetables in bacon. As the heat goes into our Dutch oven, from the top, it will cook that bacon. As the bacon cooks, the grease from it will drip down into these vegetables, cooking them. We'll reduce our cooking time just a little bit and should make it taste really good. Really crucial part, getting this back on without getting any of the dust into what we're cooking. Now, because those charcoals on the top, those briquettes, are getting kind of worn out, we're going to put a few on there. We don't really need any more heat on the bottom, but I'll put a couple of briquettes down there and then just kick those under our Dutch oven. And again, make note of what time I did that. People will ask about cooking times. That's going to vary a lot depending on what you're cooking, ambient temperature, wind, what Dutch oven you have. Basically, I've left the meat cook for 30 minutes. Now I'll put the vegetables in there for 30 more and then check them. Our cake should take about 20 minutes, and about 20 minutes has gone by. So let me get the Is the Cake Done tester, and we'll take a look at it. And now we'll take our Dutch oven lid remover, and again, very carefully take the lid off. Nothing can ruin a white cake faster than getting gray ash in it. Take that lid off, and it looks okay. Now we'll take our Is the Cake Done tester, also known as a butter knife, and we discover that no, it isn't done, but it's getting fairly close. One of the things about cooking a cake, or I should say baking a cake in a Dutch oven, is that once you take it away from the charcoal, that pot is still really hot and it will continue to bake. So I'll actually remove this from the heat before it's totally done, which will be in about 5 minutes. Now we have our mixing bowl cleaned, we have some more charcoal heating up, we got our last Dutch oven. It's time to make our biscuits. I've opened a can of flour. Yes, I opened it on the bottom. And when putting it in the bowl, you have to make sure you find the desiccant packet that comes in it. But the crucial thing is there's 2 desiccant packets in there. So I'll put in almost all of my flour, but not quite all of it. Then we'll put in a little bit of salt and put in some baking powder, which has to be carefully measured. And we'll take a stick of margarine. Now when you make biscuits, it requires some kind of shortening, like vegetable shortening or just margarine. And I'll take this stick of margarine and I will generously grease the bottom of our pan. And I say generously. Sometimes a cookbook will say to liberally grease something. No, we don't want to do that. And then we'll take the rest of our margarine, put it in our bowl, get our pastry blender out, and cut it in. Now that's from junior high cooking class. What's a pastry blender for? Blending pastry? No, it's for cutting in. Yes, it sounded dumb to me at the time, too. You can't belabor the point of cutting things in, but it's not a step that you can really skip either. You gotta make sure that the shortening or the margarine or whatever you're using. Yes, some people really do use lard. Get that really cut in there. Then we'll add our milk. Then we'll mix it up. Now, a lot of times you'll mix this with a fork, but I'm just going to use the pastry blender. And we need a little more. And this shouldn't be like a cake batter. It should be like a dough, like biscuit dough. And this is why you always save just a little bit of flour, because I'm going to need a little bit more. Then knead the dough. This is a very simple recipe and it makes really good biscuits. Slightly more. And you really should measure the ingredients. But since What I'm making right now represents probably the 500th batch of biscuits that I've made. By now I can pretty well eyeball it. There we go. Then you make these into biscuits. You don't want them too big, and put them in the Dutch oven. I'm rolling that around in the flour. And there we go. We're going to have 5 biscuits. And now we'll go check and see if our charcoal's ready and start these baking. And now our charcoal's ready, and just like everything else, we want far fewer coals on the bottom than we do on the top, and we want them spread out quite a bit. Some people will say put them in a ring. I don't. I just spread them around. Most of the heat you want coming from the top. As far as how long they'll take, depends on the Dutch oven you're using, ambient temperature, wind, what biscuit recipe you're using, how brown you want your biscuits. But generally I find about 20 minutes. I also typically use less charcoal than what a lot of books will call for, because I think using less heat and a greater baking time beats burning something. Now, speaking of books, you can find a lot of Dutch oven cookbooks out there, and I find them to be very useful on those occasions when I've forgotten to bring newspaper to start our charcoal with. Any Dutch oven cookbook I've ever read didn't really have a lot of useful information. If I were to give you one piece of information to have about Dutch oven cooking, it would be there's a degree of unpredictability, and the way your Dutch oven is going to work with what you're baking in the environment that you're in may be significantly different than what I'm doing here. While we're waiting for our biscuits to bake, there's a couple of things I want to add about baking cakes. Today I'm baking a white cake. Baking a white cake in a Dutch oven in the field can be very stressful. If you're baking a chocolate cake and you get a little bit of ash in there, stir it in, nobody will notice. Baking a chocolate cake, if you burn the bottom just a little bit, nobody will notice. With a white cake, you get ash in it, you ruin it. With a white cake, you burn the bottom, you ruin it. Baking a white cake at a rendezvous where a lot of people are expecting to eat it causes me a great deal of stress. You might notice if you look close that I have more gray hair now than I did when we started this presentation. So in a while, we'll go pull the white cake out of the Dutch oven, see how we did. But for right now, let's go check on our ham and see if our vegetables are getting pretty close to being done. A while ago, the charcoal on top of our ham had gotten to the point where it really was just about burned out, so I replaced it with some new charcoal. So let's see how done our vegetables are, and our "is our cake done" indicator can also be used as an "are our vegetables done" indicator. Again, you have to be very careful about taking the lid off. Still a little al dente, so we'll give that a few more minutes. Now, let's see how our biscuits are doing. By my watch, they should be just about done. And they are. So we'll take those off the heat and take a look at them. And here's our biscuits on the plate, browned just a little bit on the bottom. They turned out really well, and we'll eat those with the butter and some honey. And here's our white cake, browned just a little bit on the top. Looks like it turned out pretty well. Now let's frost it. Now, when frosting a cake that you make in a Dutch oven, I find that it's a whole lot easier to buy frosting when I'm going into the field than make it once I get there. Another thing that's really important is you have to let the cake and the Dutch oven really cool off. Otherwise, you put the frosting in, it melts, it ruins the whole project. Something else to be aware of is that when I make the cake as moist as I can, that it can make it a little bit crumbly, and the frosting can be a little bit hard to spread, and it wants to pick up cake crumbles, so you gotta be careful about how you do it. I also have the personal philosophy of putting a lot of frosting on a cake. I figure that if somebody doesn't like that much frosting, they can take it off. But if you have too little, then you're stuck. So put all this frosting on there, and then we'll try to gently spread that frosting out evenly across the cake. And of course, in the Dutch oven, here's a very important point as well. Keep the pine needles out when you can. In the Dutch oven, we can't really frost the sides of the cake. And yes, you could take the cake out and put it on a plate, but that to me makes more hassle than it's worth. But because we can't really frost the sides, we have to have more frosting on the top. Frosting, icing, tomato, carbine, carbine. And these days when I go to Mountain Man rendezvous and you're out there doing the potluck dinner and I bring the chili or the bacon and beans or the ham and yam and I bring this cake, I found that today's generation of rendezvous type of people tends to have a mean average age that's a lot older than me. And even though today different types of cakes might be popular, I found that when I make white cake and then cover that white cake in vanilla frosting and some shredded coconut, I make a lot of points with the little old ladies. Now let's take a close-up look at the cake. And there it is, just like your grandma used to make. A very important thing in the field. There's bugs, there's pine needles. Keep it covered up whenever you can. And here's the piece of the cake on the plate. Bottom brown just a little bit. Looks like it turned out perfectly. So now we're back to our ham and yam. We have our Dutch oven lid remover, our potato tester. Let's see how we're doing. Perfect. Now let's put some of this on a plate. Now this Dutch oven just came off the charcoal, so we don't want to put it on the plastic table. But as you can see, the ham got a little more done on the top than I'd like, but our bacon is crispy. Our potatoes and our yams are cooked, but they're not mushy. Let's put some of this on a plate. And here's our pineapple, our apple, our potato, our yam, a strip of crisp bacon. And although the ham was done a little too much on top, it's still very moist, and the whole thing looks like it turned out pretty well. Well, that was pretty fun, and it looked like all of our food turned out really well. And no, none of the food will go to waste. It'll all be eaten. A couple of questions that I know are going to come up is, first, what's this thing dangling from my lapel? It's an Irish wolfhound. Secondly, why am I wearing this hunting coat instead of the ones that I typically wear? Because those really shouldn't be machine washed very often. This coat is machine washable, and now that it's covered with bits of food and smoke, that's exactly what it needs. So, next on our agenda is the subject of 3-day survival packs. Let's take a look at a couple of them. Now we've changed locations. We are on the range, so please bear with gunfire here in the background. And now let's talk about 3-day survival packs. I've got 2 packs here. This is one that I assembled for the purpose of selling it. No, it's not for sale now. And this is my personal 3-day pack. There's a big difference between these two. A lot of people will assemble or buy a 3-day survival pack, and then it'll go in the trunk of their car or wherever they carry it, and it will receive 0 PMCS. So for packs like that, with that in mind, they have to be packed a certain way, which is different than my personal needs. A really good example is, in here are sealed containers of water that have a very long shelf life. On my pack, I just have canteens, because my pack gets used frequently, and so the water gets changed out. Now, in talking about 3-day survival packs, there is a long list of yabbits and disclaimers and caveats. Starting with 1, we're talking about 3-day survival packs. We are not talking about doomsday prepping. I am not in any way encouraging anyone to be, or discouraging anyone from being, a doomsday prepper. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about 3-day survival packs. Secondly, I am of the opinion that 3-day survival packs are a good idea. Put one together, keep it in your desk at work, or keep it in your locker at work, in the trunk of your car, wherever. In some kind of disaster, you might find that it's a very handy thing to have. 3, we have to keep in mind that this is a survival pack, not a camping, hiking backpack. It'd be great to have a pack with your tent, your sleeping bag, your cook stove, your fuel, all kinds of food, but if you did that, the pack would be very big, prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, difficult to store in your locker at work, and it would be heavy to the point where a lot of people wouldn't be able to carry it for the extended distances they may need to carry it. This is a 3-day survival pack, just to make the difference between life and death. Now, talking about carrying it brings us to point 4. In a disaster, flood, hurricane, snowstorm, whatever, you might very well find yourself far from home, having to get home, or in the disaster area, having to get out of that point. And you might have to do that on foot. It's very likely in a real disaster, roads will not be navigable. Now, some people will say that they have a bicycle or a motorcycle, and that can be a big help, but I'm still of the opinion you may very well end up on foot. As a member of the National Guard, I have on several occasions manned checkpoints. And what is a very likely thing is, you're in the disaster area, we set up a checkpoint, not letting you out. It's going to be a few days before we can get any help to you, but in the meantime, we're just not going to let you out. But you really want to get out of there, and you'll end up going over hill and dale, through the bushes, taking the scenic route to get out of there. A 3-day survival pack must be put together with the mindset that you may very well end up on foot. Now, 5, nothing I say should be inferred as a tutorial. I am in no way attempting to tell you what you should have in your 3-day survival pack. I'm only displaying what I have in mind. And 6, we are not talking about doomsday prepping. We're talking about 3-day survival packs. So with that, let's get started. I'll put this one aside, and I'll take all the contents out of mine and show you what's in there. So I've got the contents on the table, and that thing you saw that was rolled up on top of the pack was this raincoat. It's a heavy-duty plastic, full-length raincoat. It's Swiss military issue. I got it from Sportsman's Guide for, I think, $12. Outstanding piece of equipment. I also have my Gore-Tex sleeping bag cover and this poncho liner. Now, a military poncho liner is designed to tie to the inside of a poncho and make a rudimentary sleeping bag. Well, what I've done with this one is I folded it in half and sewed it up into a sleeping bag. It'd be nice to have a full-weight sleeping bag in this pack, but there isn't the space for it, and it's too heavy. That poncho liner is fine when you're outside sleeping in the field when the temperatures at night are around 50. Any less than that, it can get to be a cold night. So to compensate for that, we're going to do a little bit of multitasking in terms of the extra clothing that I carry. I carry extra underwear, extra t-shirt, 2 extra pairs of socks, but in lieu of an extra pair of pants, I have an extra pair of sweatpants. They can go under my normal pants as an insulated layer, or I can put those on before I get into my inadequate sleeping bag. Helps a lot. I also have a Ziploc baggie with a long sleeve t-shirt in it. Same thing. So, these insulated layers in conjunction with my inadequate sleeping bag, it might still be a rather cold night, but we're talking about survival. Other things I have in terms of cold weather gear is a pair of gloves, and I've got this military issue wool scarf. Now the wool scarf can be worn as a scarf. I can also turn it inside out, and yeah, this isn't a fashion show. Stocking hat. And I can take the rest of the scarf, make it a de facto ski mask. Very useful piece of equipment. Now, in terms of the food I carry, some people will say to carry dehydrated food. Dehydrated food has a couple of downsides in that sometimes that dehydrated food not only needs to be mixed with water, but it needs to be hot water. So you have the lightweight dehydrated food, but that increases your need for water. And you're going to need some kind of stove or ability to build a fire and something to heat water in. I'd prefer to carry just canned food. And what I've got is a couple of cans of sardines, some oysters, cans of tuna, a couple of cans of Van de Kamp's. Okay, everybody be ready to laugh. Beanie, weenie. Ha 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 ha. All it is pork and beans with some sliced up hot dogs in it. It's really good. And, very important thing so many people forget, a spoon. Now, what I also have is this sealed can of something called pilot bread. It's just a fairly thick, round cracker. It's the size and shape of the can. And so I can put my tuna or my sardines on crackers. And I have foil pouches of MRE, peanut butter, jelly, and cheese. Another really crucial point, if you're going to carry these foil pouches of peanut butter or cheese in your pack, they must be in a rigid container. I learned that the hard way. Another thing I carry is this little bottle of various different vitamin and mineral supplements. It's good to help keep up with nutrition when food is scarce or inadequate. Now, I carry these 2 canteens of water, but in addition to that, I also have a bottle of water purification tablets. Yes, sometimes water purification tablets are called for. In addition to that, I have this filter. You put this filter into whatever water, attach the hose to it, attach the other end to the pump this, and it will pump the water into whatever container. Many different filters out there, some are better than others. This is the one I carry. It is important to note that while the filter will filter out bacteria and algae and giardia, it will not turn salt water into fresh water. It will not filter out petrolates. Now, talking about the filter is a good time to bring up the point that, as far as I can tell, everyone in the entire world has a survival pack that's better than mine. A good example is, I was displaying this pack at a gun show once, and somebody came up and looked at it and said, "Canteens? I wouldn't carry water, I'd carry a filter." Now that is a quote. Now listen to that again. I wouldn't carry water, I'd carry a filter. The subtle nuances there. He did not say, I don't carry water, I carry a filter. He said, I wouldn't carry water, I'd carry a filter. Which means that in reality what he has is nothing. But someday he's going to build a survival pack that's far better than mine, so even though he doesn't have anything, he's still better off than me. And I could bore you for an hour with anecdotes like that. Now, a couple other things I have in here. A very rudimentary fire starting kit, a butane lighter, a waterproof match container with waterproof matches in it, and a fire stick. More about those later. A flashlight that can hook up to a rail system. Insect repellent. Now this doesn't look like much, but this Repel 100, it's a little pump spray, and in the field, when there was a lot of bugs out there, this was enough for 3 of us for 3 days, so it's really pretty good stuff. I also have this Ziploc baggie with my personal hygiene gear in it. Soap, shampoo, toothbrush, toothpaste, floss, razor, sewing kit, foot powder, and a little deck of cards. Sometimes one of your biggest enemies in the field is boredom. I also have a few of these little discs. Now, what are those? This is called an aqua towel, and what it is, it's a highly compressed, heavy-duty paper towel. Add water to it, and you get this big paper towel. Outstanding for personal hygiene, and depending on what kind of hygiene you're using it for, when you're done you can wash it out and dry it out. It'll never go back to being a little disc, but it can be used again. A couple of important points on here is there are things I keep in the outside pouches of the pack and things I keep inside the pack. The things I keep on the outside of the pack have two things in common. One, they're things that I might need to get to fairly quickly, like my extra 92F magazine, and they're also things that have the potential for spillage. My canteens have water in them. The caps might work loose, some might spill. I'd rather have that spill on the outside of the pack than the inside. Also attached on the outside is my firearms maintenance kit. That has CLP in it. I'd sure rather have that leak on the outside of the pack than on the inside. Now this pack is intended that it can be used as a standalone pack, but it's also really intended that I would use it in conjunction with my LBV. Let me show you my LBV. This is the LBV that I typically wear in the field. A little over a month from now when we're out there hunting jackrabbits, you'll see me wearing this. Yes, it is old and outdated, but many people would tell you that I'm old and outdated, and this is what works for me. Now what I have here in these mag pouches is AR-15 magazines. In these mag pouches, over here I keep my binos, and beneath that a roll of black electrician's tape. In this mag pouch I have two Beretta 92FS magazines, and beneath that a bandana. Many uses for a bandana in the field. Now in these pouches, in here I typically don't keep anything. I can put something small and mission specific in there. And over here I keep a military issue Lensatic compass. And this is one of the few things I actually do keep dummy corded to myself. Now what I also have over here is an M16 mag pouch, which right now has AR-15 mags in it, but it's a really good sized pouch to carry all kinds of different things. Magazines for different types of rifles, shotgun ammo fits really well in there. Behind that I have a canteen with canteen cup and canteen cup stove. Over here, my holster with Beretta 92FS. Behind that, another canteen. Now, what I also have is this fanny pack. Let's take a look at the contents of the fanny pack. Now, side note, you'll see I have a sheath but no knife in it. Off camera, I was using that knife to cut up some of the meat and vegetables. I want to clean it before I put it back in the sheath. It's a buck 119. And remember, as far as the fanny pack goes, that this is intended to be used in addition to the backpack, but also intended to act as a standalone. So we have the space bag, which is like a space blanket, but it's a space bag. Some 550 cord. This is a cardboard box wrapped in duct tape, and in here are trioxane fuel tablets. We'll discuss a little more about that when we talk about fire starting materials. Here's another cardboard box wrapped in duct tape, and in here is foil pouches of MRE peanut butter and jelly, MRE bread, some MRE smoked almonds, which really are pretty good, waterproof match container with waterproof matches, Ziploc baggie with some of our dehydrated paper towels, and a t-shirt and some socks. Military issue poncho. It can be worn as a rain poncho, made into a couple of different types of hooches, or you can put it around a sleeping bag or just around yourself, snap it, and it can make a workable substitute for the Gore-Tex sleeping bag cover. There. That is the speech impediment that I talk about, at least one manifestation of it, where a word was left out. It is very annoying, and it makes a lot of what I do just that much more difficult. Some more MRE almonds. Keeping things like the almonds, peanuts, whatever kind of nuts in the field is really handy. They've got a lot of protein, a lot of fat, a lot of salt. They're a good thing to eat in the field. Now, a couple other things we have in here. This little spool has some fishing line and a fish hook. This, wrapped in tape, is a few more fish hooks and a couple of fishing lures and a couple of weights and a little bobber. And that's the contents of our fanny pack. Now, let me get all this stuff put away, and then we'll dissect this survival pack. So here's the contents of our pack. And remember, there are a few things you should have that are intended to be supplied by the purchaser, such as underwear and socks, perhaps extra eyeglasses, whatever medications you might need, feminine hygiene products, the list goes on. So let's take a look at what we have. We've got some wool mittens and a wool scarf, your Swiss military raincoat. For sleeping bag and tent, we've got our space bag, and this thing that's called a tube tent. Now all this is a big orange plastic tube and a string. You run the string through the tube, tie the string to trees or whatever, and then you weigh down the bottom of the tube with rocks or whatever you have available, and you've created a triangular shaped tent. No front or back, but it's a whole lot better than nothing. A sealed package of toilet paper, some really rudimentary medical supplies. We've got a Ziploc bag with some antiseptic wipes, band-aids, tape, a roll of gauze. Now here's our food, but I'm going to come back to that later. This camp stove that you fold open, and it has some fuel cubes with it. Now here's a piece of equipment that I really like. A lot of times when you have one piece of equipment that's made to do several jobs, it ends up not doing any of those jobs very well. I consider this an exception. This is a combination AM/FM radio flashlight cell phone charger. Now you don't put batteries in it. You crank charge the internal battery, and it is a flashlight and an AM/FM radio, but I gotta tell you, the radio stations have to be fairly close. AM, a little better. FM, you better be in town at the radio station. But it also has this adapter that acts like the cigarette lighter on your car. So if you have your cell phone and the charging cable that plugs into the cigarette lighter, you plug that into this, plug this into your charger, crank it, and you'll be cranking a while, but you can charge your cell phone. Really good piece of equipment. Now here's just a soap dish. These inexpensive plastic soap dishes make really good small rigid boxes. This one has a butane lighter and 3 candles in it. Also, waterproof match container with waterproof matches. Now here's our fishing kit. We have some fishing line and this nice little tackle box that has some hooks, some weights, some fake bugs, some fake bait, a couple of lures, some nice little bobbers, not much, but a whole lot more than nothing. Foldable shovel. We'll also come back to the water bottle. Plastic cutlery, floss. Here's another really good piece of equipment. You have a knife and a hatchet. Now this hatchet is really made more for skinning animals than it is for chopping wood, but still, a hatchet is a hatchet. Sewing kit, another soap dish. This soap dish has bar soap in it. Black electrician's tape, which has 987,654,321 uses. Flashlight, batteries, insect repellent, compass, 550 cord, Ziploc baggie with a notebook and pens. Now, let's talk about our food. Here's a tin can, and it has in it some small pouches of peanut butter. And here's our crackers to put the peanut butter on. These are wafer cookies. You know when you buy those wafer cookies that you have the chocolate, the strawberry, and the vanilla? These are vanilla wafer cookies. And yes, they're in this can, but they're really pretty good. Now for water, I have 3 cans of water. This is a big plus because this has a shelf life of 25 plus years. Also because it's a can, it's not going to get accidentally punctured in the pack. People have concerns about freezing. I've taken some of these, put them in the freezer, frozen them solid, taken them out, thawed them, repeated the process. These won't burst when frozen. 2 downsides. 1, you open this can, you can smell it. It smells like a swimming pool. Drink this water, tastes like a swimming pool. If at all possible, when you open this, you want to let it sit a few minutes, preferably a half hour or more, to let some of that chlorine dissipate before you drink it. The other downside is once you open the can, you can't reseal it. So what can you do? That's what the water bottle's for. Now this water bottle has in it, in the pack, in the interest of saving space, a whole bunch of little items. So the way this pack is designed is that as soon as you get into whatever crisis, the first thing you do is take out this water bottle, take these items and put them in your pockets or wherever you need them, open up your can of water, pour it into your water bottle, and then get going. So let's see what's in our water bottle. And of course, to be blunt, I packed this long enough ago, I really don't remember everything in here. But we have, right off the top, a bandana. Then we have some of our Just Add Water paper towels, a toothbrush, no surprise there, a little deck of cards. Again, one of the biggest enemies in the field is boredom. The tube that'll go to the water filter that's in here. The cheap $5 knockoff of a multi-tool. There's various knife blades, screwdriver blades, pliers. And although this isn't as good as a real Gerber multi-tool, it's a $5 knockoff, this is one of those cases where it's a lot better than nothing. Here's the other piece of the water filter. The way this is intended to use is you stick the straw in and just stick this end in the water and suck through the straw. It's not much, but again, better than nothing. Razor. You might think, why would you need a razor? I mean, you wouldn't worry too much about being socially presentable in a disaster. You know, some people just feel cleaner when they can shave. Now, here are some waterproof and windproof matches. I can dunk this in water and then pull it back out and strike it and it'll work. Also, if I blow it out, it will give it a second and it'll catch fire again. It's hard to see, but it is burning. There we go. These can be a really handy thing to have, but they have a couple of downsides. Most of these waterproof, windproof storm matches you buy are strike-on box only. And although the matches are waterproof, the box isn't. If this box gets wet, you can't strike it. So you've got to keep the box in something that's waterproof. Water purification tablets, a Swiss Army knife. Now, when I talked about getting equipment of sufficient quantity and quality, this is the genuine Victorinox Swiss Army knife, not the knockoff. One of the many things that made this pack so grossly overpriced. Toothpaste. Another paper towel, and some more stormproof matches. These are actually the really good stormproof matches, but they have the same downside. They're strike-on box only, and the box isn't stormproof, nor waterproof, or not proof much of anything. Now you'll notice a lot of redundancy in fire building material. You've got this stove that comes with the fuel, butane lighter, and candles. An assortment of different windproof, stormproof matches. Waterproof match container that has in it waterproof matches. And the striker is in there. The thing is, I'm going to presume that if you're in a real disaster, you're facing inclement weather. And if you're carrying this red backpack, you're probably not in a tactical situation. Now, things like this space bag can be a big help, but when you're out at night, in the cold, in the dark, in the wet, getting a fire going can often be the difference between living and dying, being somewhat comfortable and absolutely miserable. If you're lost, a fire can be the difference between being found and being lost. So anytime I'm doing anything with survival packs like this, I like to put a lot of fire starting materials in here. I'm also presuming that a lot of people don't really have a lot of fire building skill, so I'm giving them an edge. Now that brings us to the topic of some different types of fire starting materials. Let's take a look at some of those. Before we get into fire starting materials, I want to discuss briefly the idea of having a firearm in your 3-day survival pack. Some people will ask me, do I think having a firearm in the 3-day survival pack is a good idea? The answer is two things. One, no one can decide what's right for you except you. And two, if I were to make a recommendation, I would recommend that having a firearm in your 3-day survival pack is a good idea if you can do so without violating your local laws or getting in trouble at work. Let me expand on that a little bit. A lot of people will have their 3-day survival pack in a desk drawer at work or under their desk or in their locker. And that's great unless you work at a company that prohibits firearms on the premises. If you have your 3-day survival pack with a firearm in it in your locker, the chances that someone is going to find out about it and then someone is going to report you to management, there's a good chance of that, especially if whoever's reporting you is behind you on the promotion list. And then the chances that you're going to get in trouble with management and lose your job greatly outweigh the chances that you're going to need that firearm. If you keep your 3-day survival pack in the trunk of your car, do you park on company property? If so, does the company you work for have a no firearms policy? And if so, the chances that someone's going to find out about that and report it to management and you're going to get in trouble greatly outweigh the chances that you're going to need that firearm. Now, there are people who will say that you should ignore what management thinks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense until you're standing in the unemployment line. Now, as far as your local laws, different jurisdictions will have not only different laws, but those laws will be interpreted different ways. Let me see if I can explain that. You see that I don't have a firearm in my pack, but I do have one on my LBV. And in the state that I live in, having that firearm and the way that I store it and the way that I transport it is 100% legal. But I used to live in a state that prohibited having a loaded firearm in a car. Well, not only do I want to read the statute, but I want to talk to an attorney and make sure that I'm interpreting that statute correctly. So I did, and what he told me was that even if you have your firearm unloaded in the car, you might still get arrested for having a loaded firearm. What? And what he explained was that if you have your firearm in the car, unloaded, but you have your magazine in your pocket, that the police may very well arrest you and charge you with having a loaded firearm in the car. If you have a range bag, you're on your way to the range, and you have your pistol in there, unloaded, but you have ammunition in the bag, they may arrest you and charge you with loaded firearm in the car. He also told me that the district attorney typically loses those cases in court, but that doesn't stop the police from making that arrest. So if you're dealing with a situation like that, you have your firearm and your ammunition in your 3-day survival pack, even if the firearm's unloaded, are you running the risk of being arrested because it would be interpreted that you're violating a local law? And again, if you are in a situation like that, the chances that you're getting into some kind of legal trouble greatly outweigh the chances that you're going to need that firearm. So bottom line, 3-day survival pack with a firearm in it is a good idea if you can do so without violating your local laws and without getting in trouble at work. Now let's take a look at some fire starting material. In talking about fire starting materials, I have to preface it with saying that if you're in the field in a military or tactical situation, starting a fire might not be a good idea. But if you're talking about your 3-day survival pack, or if you're just out in the woods and circumstances become such that you end up spending the night when you didn't really intend to, so you're not prepared for it, especially if the conditions are very cold, very wet, or both, getting a fire going can be crucial. It can be the difference between being comfortable and being miserable, between getting some sleep that night or not getting any, between being okay or being a genuine cold casualty, between being alive or not being. Starting a fire can be very important. But talking about fire starting materials comes with a few caveats. The first one being there's a myriad of different things you could buy or that you could make, and I'm going to barely scratch the surface. Secondly, nothing I say today should be inferred as any kind of tutorial. I am in no way trying to tell you what you should use or what you should put in your pack. I'm just going to show you some of the things that I've used. Third, if I were going to give any advice about packing fire-starting materials, it would be that you have to decide what to carry and how much to carry based on an honest evaluation of your fire-starting ability. Let me explain what I mean. We're camping out, we're going to cook over the fire, so I'm starting to get the food together, and I tell the guy I'm with, I'll get the food together while you get the fire started. We're in a place where it hasn't rained in any meaningful way in weeks. There's lots of dry pine needles on the ground, dry pine cones. I'd just done some renovation work, so I had a whole bunch of pieces of kiln-dried 2x4s with me. We had a hatchet. He had, of course, matches, and a quart jar of kerosene. And with all of that, he couldn't get a fire going. I ended up having to explain to him that kerosene or not, you've got to chop that kindling a lot smaller. Oh, okay. So the next day, I'll get the food together, you get the fire started. He still could not get a fire started. If I were to put together a 3-day survival pack for somebody like him, instead of a waterproof match container with matches, it might include several road flares. Instead of a few pieces of fire stick, it might include a few full packages of fire stick. You have to have an honest evaluation of your fire starting ability. So, one other caveat is also that I discussed things you can buy and things you can make. When I do demonstrations like this, I am constantly reminded that everyone in the entire world has a better pack than I do. And when I point out this product and say this is something that's really good, and I'll explain what it is in a little bit, people tell me that, oh no, I wouldn't buy that, I'd make something like that. Now, did you catch the subtle nuance? Not, I won't buy it or I don't buy it, I make something like that. It's, I wouldn't buy it, I'd make something. So in reality what he has is nothing, but he's still more prepared than me because someday he's going to build something really cool. Trying to make things can be very difficult, and it can be time-consuming. One of the crew decided that he wanted to make some fire starters, and so what he was going to do was use rope and paraffin. So he buys some cotton rope, cuts it into a whole bunch of 1.5-inch lengths, soaks that in the paraffin, lets it dry out. They were outstanding fire starters, but they were also very time-consuming to make. And a lot of people have good intentions of doing things that they never really get done. Life is full of all those things that we should do that we don't. Like flip your mattress occasionally, drain and do PMCS on your hot water heater at home. Yeah, I've never done that. There are a lot of things out there we should do that we don't do, and a lot of people never get around to things. A while ago I was going to buy a steel plate target setup that had the spinning plates, and someone told me that I shouldn't buy such a thing, that he would make something like that for me. Well, that's been about 20 years ago. I haven't gotten it yet. Sometimes you're far better off to just go to the store, spend a few dollars and buy something, than live your life with all these good intentions that never really come to fruition. So with all of that, let's talk about some fire starters. First and foremost, about the most basic thing someone will have is just some matches. Now here's a cardboard box of strike-on box only wooden matches. You take the match out, strike it on the box, it lights, and it'll burn for a little bit. There's two major downsides of matches like this. First, they're not waterproof. Secondly, the box is not in any way water resistant. It's strike-on box only, and even if the matches are dry, if the box, I'm just putting it on the wet table, gets a little bit wet, the match won't light, and the box will just go to pieces on you, and because they're strike-on box only, there's not much you can do with them. Now, an upgrade from that are these Proforce Equipment Storm Matches. These are supposed to be waterproof and windproof. Well, let's put it in the water. Not working out real well. Yep, almost got it. There it goes. So was it not waterproof? The problem is when I got the wet match on the box, it wouldn't strike. I had to turn it around and use the dry side. And it's kind of going. These are a good item, but again, the box they come in is just this chintzy cardboard box that is not in any way water resistant. Just the water on my hands from doing that has almost completely ruined the box already. So an upgrade from something like that are strike anywhere kitchen matches. These are the kind that have the white tip. They're generally a whole lot easier to light than strike-on-box only matches, and they can be struck on a rock, on your knife blade, on your gun barrel, on all kinds, well, depending on your gun, on all kinds of things. They're a big upgrade, they're very useful. They have two major downsides. They're not waterproof, and neither is the box. Of course, in this case, you can throw the box away. They're strike-anywhere matches. That's a big help. So if you're going to carry matches like this, they have to be carried in something that's waterproof. Let me tell you an anecdote. Long time ago, I was in the field by myself on a training exercise. It was November, it was very cold, it was very wet. I'm about to become a heat casualty. I've got to get a fire going. Now, I have some of these Coghlan, Coughlin. I'm going to pronounce it Coughlin, that's probably wrong. I have some of these Coughlin's fire sticks. It's just some particle board impregnated with paraffin. They're supposed to be waterproof. We'll put that to the test in a minute. They're a really good product. But the only thing I had to light them was a Ziploc baggie with strike anywhere kitchen matches. Now I've got two big problems going on. One, I'm wet. Two, it's dark. So I open my Ziploc baggie of matches, and I can't really dry my hand off on myself because at that point every article of clothing I had was also wet. And my hand is cold, and I reach into the bag, and I get a match, and I can't tell, do I have it by the head or by the tail? Oh, it doesn't matter now. It's wet. Okay, let's get another one. Do I have it by the head or by the... No, well, can't tell. Oh, yeah, ruined it again. Well, after a few times of doing that, I finally decided, okay, I've got to try to get some zen going here. I got to be able to look in this bag and see what's in there. And I open the bag, and I look in it, and it had been raining so much that the water that had collected around the edge of my Jones cap ran right into the bag, ruining them. Really lucky that that was a training exercise, not any kind of real situation, or I'd have been in a lot of trouble. So what did I learn from that? Well, first, instead of chinsing on the Ziploc bag, get a real waterproof match container. Also, because I kept getting the match by the head, if you have a match container like this, one end of the match is fatter than the other end, so if you stack the matches some up and some down, you can get more matches in it. Put them all in, head first, you'll have a few less matches, but at least when I open this and put a match in my hand when it's dark, I know I've got it by the tail. That's a big plus. And these waterproof match containers, now I got this one a little bit wet, can be used to strike the match if the outside of the waterproof match container isn't too wet. Sometimes what you have to resort to is taking two matches and striking them on each other, which sometimes works better than others. You can see the downside to just having matches. So what's an upgrade from a waterproof match container? Oh, another anecdote about waterproof match containers. I had a waterproof match container, that's great. I was out in the field on a subsequent trip, stuck it in my shirt pocket, wasn't paying attention, leaned over a stream, it fell out of my pocket into a very fast stream, and it was gone. So I learned to have multiple fire-starting sources. Now, an upgrade from a waterproof match container with matches could be a butane lighter. Now, as soon as I pull this out, there's all kinds of people who will tell me how bad this is and how wrong this is because they would have, or they're gonna get, something better. A butane lighter can be very efficient to start a fire. It's a really neat thing to have. they can fail. This one is opaque, so when it runs low on fuel, well, I can't really tell. A good idea is to get the ones that are clear that you can see through and see how much butane is left in there. Also, sometimes they'll break. I've had one where I went to start it and the wheel broke out of its position and fell on the ground and I couldn't find it. They can fail. But the number of times they've failed is very small in comparison to the thousands of times I've lit a butane lighter and it worked just fine. The big downside of a butane lighter is that they're really sensitive to cold. Now you'd think, well, it's in my pants pocket, that ought to keep it. Not enough. Let me tell you another anecdote. It was January, I'm out in the sagebrush desert, very dry but very cold, temperature in the single digits Fahrenheit. I'm laying on the ground in my sleeping bag, no tent, and this is a good intermediate weight sleeping bag, and about 0400 I'm discovering that my sleeping bag is insufficient. I'm becoming hypothermic. I'm shivering and getting to the point where I'm actually going beyond shivering. I'm in trouble. I got to do something. I managed to get up, get my boots on, get some sagebrush, get it together, take a fire stick, get ready to light it, and my butane lighter wouldn't light. Great time for my butane lighter to quit. The problem is it was so cold that the butane wouldn't flow like it's supposed to. What I ended up having to do was stick it in my armpit for a few minutes until it warmed up, and then it would work. They have their limitations. But in carrying multiple sources of combustion, a butane lighter is, in my opinion, a really good thing to have, and it can be backed up by a waterproof match container with matches in it, and perhaps other things. Now, right about now is when someone's saying, what about waterproof matches? Well, we saw that some of those storm matches weren't all they're cracked up to be. Here's another product. These are Coughlin's waterproof matches. 4 boxes of 40 matches each that I paid only a couple of dollars for. Sounds like a great deal. Some members of the crew have been purchasing this identical product for decades. Seems like a good thing to have. Now, these are actually pretty good quality waterproof matches. Take a couple of them out. Fires right up. They really are pretty good waterproof matches. They also come in a box that has a pretty good striker on it. But there is a downside. The matches are waterproof, but the box, again, isn't. However, instead of being, the insert is a piece of cardboard, but the outside isn't. It's actually a very thin little balsa wood box, so it won't go to pieces on you like a cardboard box. However, being such thin balsa wood, it is very easy to destroy. And there's been a couple of times where a couple of the crew have had this box of matches in their backpack, and it gets crushed by something and it goes to pieces on you. So this is a good product, but it's not infallible. What I've done is sometimes I'll take a waterproof match container and I'll take this box apart and just take the striker and put in the waterproof match container with waterproof matches. Now, a waterproof match container doesn't have to be something you buy. I know we're talking about I could make that, but various types of pill bottles can work really well as a waterproof match container. Again, matches all head down. Brings us to this interesting thing. This is like a fire stick. It's the particle board with paraffin, but it has a big match head on it. Instead of having to light it, you can strike it like a match. Well, the fire stick is waterproof, but is this match head waterproof? Let's put that in the water. And it would appear that that it's, well, not perfect, but at least has some water resistance. And you'll strike this, and this little piece of paraffin-coated cardboard, particle board thing will actually burn for quite a while. And this can be an outstanding fire starter. Now, as we saw, there was a little bit of difficulty striking that, and of course it's strike on box only, so this type isn't the type I prefer to use. And see, even that's having a little trouble burning. And when I say waterproof, no, it won't keep burning if you get it wet, but you can relight it. The product that I like the most are these fire sticks. Now, the first time I ever bought these was when I was probably 14 years old. At the time, for a package of a dozen of them, and this is 1/3 of one, I mean a dozen of these. At the time, a package of a dozen cost 99 cents. Yesterday, I bought this package of a dozen for $2.99. So, the price hasn't gone up too terribly since I was 14 years old. To get this to burn efficiently, I take my knife and I'll just score this, creating more surface area. Obviously, you have to be careful doing it. And these will typically burn for several minutes. And even though you get a fire stick that's a whole piece, I'll often use 1/3 of one or even 1/4 of one to get a fire going. And they can be very effective. So although they are a really good product in that they are readily available, you can get them at Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, Walmart, wherever, they're inexpensive. They do have some downsides in that they can be a little hard to light. If I take my waterproof match, which broke, get another waterproof match, get it going, and try to light this. I don't know if you can hear it sizzling because it's wet. It's not really lit yet, and it didn't really catch before my match went out. Which brings me to another really useful, often overlooked fire starter, a candle. With a candle, it'll burn for a few minutes, giving me plenty of time to get my fire stick lit. And you can see this isn't something that flashes up. It's just cardboard, particle board with paraffin. But then you can get it burning, and before it sets my finger on fire. And you can then blow out your candle, put this back in your pack, and use it many, many more times. These fire sticks can be really useful, and that will burn for several minutes. I'm going to blow it out before it burns a hole in my table. But this is one of the best fire starting products that I've ever come across. If I'm going to put twigs or sticks on top of this, then even if they're damp, they have enough time for the fire stick to dry them out. And if you carry a whole bag of them with you, which, again, depending on your fire starting skills, you may or may not need to, you can break these, put them together. You can actually build the basis of your fire just out of these. If you're in a situation where you can't get anything going, these can, at least for a few minutes, give you a fire. And as I've got this set up, it'll burn for at least 10, maybe 20 minutes. Now, remember earlier I said there's certain things I have to do in real time. This is one of them. Now, I don't expect to light this big chunk of wood on fire, but this is just protecting the table. Now, here's another type of fire starter, and it's got this crumble in it, and it's in a can. And the can is not a pop-top can, so you really need to have a can opener. And it's full of this crumbly material that's a fire starter. And I just recently mail ordered this, and so I don't know if it's really any kind of waterproof, but we'll find out. And it's got this crumble in it that you put on the ground, or in this case on our log, and then you light it and it should burn. And I'm using this box of matches to illustrate my point that the waterproof matches are great, the box they come in isn't. So we light our crumble, and it'll start burning. It doesn't flare up, it burns very slow, it'll burn for quite a while. Now the question, is this stuff waterproof? Let's find out. Get some water in our lid, get it nice and wet, dump it out, put it on the top of the can. And let's see if I can get this stuff to light. And looks like that just by virtue of getting it wet, that isn't going to automatically ruin it, but you're going to have to dry it out before you use it. Not faring really well. So I would say that the stuff is more expensive, less convenient, less effective than our plain old fire sticks. Now, earlier I was discussing the trioxane fuel tablets. Let me get some of those and I'll demonstrate what those are. Now, this foil pouch has a military issue trioxane fuel tablet in it, sometimes called heat tabs. And they have their use, but they have their limitations as well. You can put the heat tab on something, and they are very easy to light. It's burning already. They also burn very clean. You can't hardly see the flame coming off it, and they burn hot. This is actually intended to be used as fuel to put under a canteen cup and heat it up, and they're really good for that. They have the downsides of these days they can be hard to find, they can be expensive, they give off toxic fumes, and they're not really made to start a fire. They're more made to burn just on their own, and although they can start a fire, they're probably not as good for starting fires as some of the other things you'd use. You'll see that's burning. But it's not doing all that well. We're getting our fire stick started. There it goes. We also saw that obviously our fire stick wouldn't light this log, especially not when it's on top of the log, but it did burn for quite a while. Of course, there are lots of other fire starting materials out there that I'm just barely scratching the surface, but mainly the main thing you have to do, if I can use the word main many times, is you have to keep your gear waterproof. I don't care if you live in Arizona. I've been to Arizona a couple of times, and the people who are there tell me that Arizona is always too something. It's too hot or too cold, too dry or too wet. It might be dry for a long time and then get a torrential downpour. So even in places like that, you have to keep your gear waterproof, and you have to pack in a way that is commensurate with your ability, and you've got to be able to get a fire going. Okay, off camera the question came up, well, if you have this can of mediocre fire starter, if the can is full, could you just light this and use it as a fire? Well, let's get our fire stick going again. Oh, and remember, this is the fire stick that I threw in our pan of water. So let's get it going. And you can see our fire stick burns, but let's put it in with our fire starter material. Okay. Well, it's burning. But it's burning really slow. So would this work as a standalone fire? Well, not much of one. It hasn't even ignited the surface completely. Comparing what I'm getting out of this very expensive can of fire starter to this very inexpensive fire stick, I'm going to say this isn't working out real well. So, could this be used as a standalone fire? I think the answer is technically yes, but no, I wouldn't use it for that. Okay, let's go on to something that might be a little more interesting. Now, before we start our next topic, I have to remind everyone that due to the sheer volume of material in today's presentation, I do not have the time to edit out every time I trip over a word. You're going to have to tolerate my speech impediment and my Shatner-esque pauses. That having been said, the next topic is something I do not want to discuss. It's delving into the political arena. There are people out there who can discuss this topic far more eloquently than I can, people who are far more qualified to talk about it than I am. It's also something that generates a great deal of hate and anger and name-calling and finger-pointing, and far too many of those fingers will be pointing at me. But it is something that I think is very important to discuss, so we're going to. And what I'm talking about is the subject of mass shootings. And when I say that, I do mean specifically mass shootings here in the United States. When I mention that, it immediately makes people angry. It immediately makes people want to lay blame on other people or on inanimate objects. It is a subject that is very divisive, and it's a subject that a lot of people approach with their political or social agendas. And that type of behavior is contradictory to solving the problem. We cannot have meaningful social discourse when it's so filled with anger, hate, and political agenda. If we want to solve this problem, it has to be done rationally by a concerted effort to genuinely solve it. So instead of discussing all those things on which we disagree, I want to discuss those few things on which I think we can agree. Whether you are someone who is a staunch 2A supporter, or you're someone like that California politician who said that if she had her way, she would demand that everyone in America turn in their guns. Whichever end of the spectrum you're on, I think there are a few things on which we can agree. First would be that mass shootings do occur. Secondly, and this in itself will stir up a lot of hate when I say this, secondly, that statistics can and all too often are manipulated. Yes, I can hear everyone sending me the hate mail on that right now. Third, I think we can agree that even if statistics are manipulated, mass shootings are occurring far more often today than they did 50, 60, 70 years ago. Fourth, I think we can agree that we would like to see fewer mass shootings. We'd like to see fewer crimes of every type: burglary, robbery, sexual assaults. If you're someone who doesn't agree with that, please turn this presentation off now. But I think we can all agree we'd like to see fewer mass shootings. And 5, I think we can all agree that if we as a society do the right things, take the right course of action, we can reduce the number of mass shootings. It's not a lost cause. Now, what is the right course of action? What are the things we as a society need to do? That's a matter of great debate, but I think we can all agree that if we do the right things, we can achieve the goal of having far fewer mass shootings. So, what's the first step in preventing mass shootings or solving the problem? It's asking a question. How do we prevent mass shootings? How do we deal with this problem? Now, as soon as I ask that, a lot of people have a lot of opinions. But I think to answer that question leads to another question. If you ask, how do we solve the problem? You have to ask, why is this phenomena occurring? What causes mass shootings? And when you ask that, again, you get a lot of hate rhetoric. But in asking the question, what causes these things, we have to take a look at the history of mass shootings in the 20th and early 21st century. Now, statistics can be manipulated, but I looked at quite a few different sources, and what I came up with was basically this. In the very early 20th century, 1905, 1910, 1915, mass shootings occurred, but they were extraordinarily rare. In the 1920s and 30s, we see a sharp uprise in the number of mass shootings. Why? Well, according to what I read, in the 1920s with Prohibition, you had a lot of organized crime and gang violence and things like that going on. The mass shootings were often related to that. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Okay, that explains it to some extent. In the 1930s, again, according to the sources I read, what you're seeing is mass shootings that have to do with familial killings. What do I mean? There's a particular type of murderer known as a family annihilator. He's most often a man who has some terrible setback, loses his job or something like that, thinks that the family is doomed, and thinks that the family can't get by without him, so he's going to help the family out by murdering all of them, and then quite often committing suicide. People at the end of their rope sometimes do that. In the 1930s, with the Depression, with starvation going on, a lot of people losing their job, there were a lot of people at the end of their rope. Okay, so we can, to some extent, explain why we see a major upswing in the number of mass shootings in the 1920s and 30s. But in the 1940s and 50s, the number goes back to where mass shootings are extremely rare. In the 1960s and 70s, we see more, but twice nothing is still nothing. They were still very rare. In the 1980s, that's where we start seeing a lot more mass shootings. So many of these were blamed on disgruntled postal workers. It got to the situation where a postal employee told me that he was forbidden from using the word disgruntled in the workplace. The mass shootings became such a thing that when someone was getting really angry or violent, they were described as going postal. And that has led us to where we are now with quite a number of mass shootings going on, what some people would call epidemic proportions. And I think we can all agree that what is today commonplace was at one time all but unheard of. And we have to ask the question, why? Now, in my opinion, the question that really needs to be asked is this, and it's complex, so bear with me. The question that needs to be asked is, today, in 2019, and for the last few years, we are seeing far more mass shootings than we saw in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. If that's the case, what was present in our society then that prevented these things from happening that isn't present now, that allows them to happen? Or, vice versa, what is present now causing these things to happen that wasn't present then to prevent such things from happening? That is the question we need to answer. And it needs to be answered with the scientific method, with empirical evidence, with sociological study, with cultural anthropological study, not with political or social agendas and political debate. Bringing agendas into that question and that line of inquiry is contradictory to solving the problem. Now, Let me give you an example. In 2001, some hijackers hijacked some planes, flew them into the World Trade Center in the Pentagon. Shortly after that happened, I actually heard people citing the 9/11 hijackings as evidence as to why we need stricter gun control. Some terrorists hijacked planes armed with box cutter knives, and that's why you need to make it more difficult for me to buy a rifle? That makes no sense. That's political and social agenda. That's not trying to solve a problem. And that brings me to the point that I really want to discuss. When asking the question, what causes these mass shootings? Many people have many opinions and they have many reasons. And there are two things that I hear a lot that I know are absolutely wrong. I can't tell you the reason or reasons behind why we have so many mass shootings now, but I can tell you some reasons that are cited that are just not correct. And the two I want to discuss are closely related. The first one is the belief that all these mass shootings occur because these days guns are so much easier to get than they were in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. That is not the case. But that mentality gets furthered by things we see in the mainstream media. For example, a week or two ago I was watching a repeat of a television series called Law and Order. And one of the characters on this show is a New York City police detective named Lenny Briscoe. And on this particular episode, Lenny and Mike have to do something at a high school, and they go into the high school and they go through the metal detectors. And Lenny makes the comment that something about back when he was wearing Brill cream, schools didn't have metal detectors. And the school administrator tells Lenny, and I'll try to get the quote right, "When you were 18, you couldn't buy a semi-automatic on every street corner." If you watch other episodes of Law & Order, there's one where the Lenny character mentions his date of birth, January 2nd, 1940. So when he was 18 was 1958. No, in 1958 you didn't buy a semi-automatic on every street corner, you mail-ordered them. You'd see an ad in a magazine, you'd give them a check or money order, allow 6 to 8 weeks for delivery, and they'd send you a rifle right to your house. No ID, no background check, no age restriction. At that time, various states and counties and municipalities had different statutes and different ordinances, but there was no federal law preventing convicted felons from possessing firearms, at least not according to any of the sources I've seen. At that time, no records were kept. Some stores would keep records, but in most places in the United States, you'd go into a hardware store and you'd buy a rifle or a shotgun or a handgun with no more fanfare than buying a garden rake or a lawnmower. There was no firearms registration. Again, some places had some, but I mean nationally. There were no restrictions on magazines. There was no restrictions on the barrel lengths of your rifle or shotgun barrel. There wasn't even a law requiring that firearms had serial numbers. Most firearms did because manufacturers like to keep records, but it wasn't until the Gun Control Act of 1968 where guns were actually required to have serial numbers. This Stevens shotgun was made sometime prior to that in the 1960s. It does not have a serial number and never did, and it's perfectly legal because when it was manufactured, serial numbers weren't required. And you'll see from back in that era a lot of .22 rifles and less expensive shotguns that just didn't have serial numbers. When I bought this shotgun a few months ago at the Electronic Superstore in Lincoln City, Oregon, when you get to the part of the paperwork where you're supposed to put in the serial number, the employee was, what do I do here? And somebody had to look it up. Oh yeah, you just write none. The idea that firearms are easier to get today than they were in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s is patently false. Now, there seems to be this idea that people think that if I go to a gun store and buy a gun, then I have to fill out paperwork, have a background check, give them my fingerprints. But if I sit at home and order it on the internet, then all of that's null and void. They'll just send it right to me. That is not true. There are some exceptions made for muzzle-loading firearms or truly antique firearms that were made in the 1890s or before. But as far as buying any current production firearm, That is not true. If you order a firearm off the internet, it is not sent to you, it's sent to your local gun dealer, and you go down there and pick it up and have to do all the paperwork. I would ask anyone who is a gun control advocate to please not take my word for that. Educate yourself. Get online, try to buy an AR platform rifle, try to buy an an AK variant, and see if they'll send it right to your house. You'll find that they don't, and you are going to end up doing some paperwork before you get your firearm. And if anybody does send it right to your house, call the BATF because crime's being committed. The idea, at the risk of being redundant, that firearms are easier to get today than they were in the 1940s and 50s and early 1960s is patently false. Now that brings me to the next thing. You will hear people claim that the reason mass shootings occur today and they didn't occur back in the old days is because mass shootings are typically perpetrated with auto-loading firearms, whether it's a rifle or a pistol, with high-capacity magazines. Now, some people get angry when I say high-capacity magazine. That's the term I'm going to use, high-capacity magazine. And today, you can buy an AR platform rifle with 20 or 30 shot magazines, or even greater. You can buy an AK platform rifle with 30 shot magazines or more. Here's a Ruger 1022. It's just a 22 rifle. When you buy it, it comes with a 10 shot magazine, but aftermarket magazines with a capacity of 25 or 30 or more are readily available. And yes, there have been a couple of mass shootings where the perpetrator used a firearm like that. Today you can buy a Glock with a 15-shot magazine, some handguns with 18-shot magazines, some with 20-shot magazines. And there's a mentality that because you can buy semi-auto, high-capacity firearms now, and you couldn't buy them back then, that's why we have so many mass shootings today. Now, is there any truth to that? Well, obviously, Glocks weren't around in 1940 or 1950. AR platform rifles didn't exist in the 1940s and 1950s. But at that time, could you buy powerful, reliable, auto-loading firearms with high-capacity magazines? Let me show you a couple of old guns. This is a Colt government model, one of the many different versions of the Colt 1911 platform. Now, some models of firearms have a name, like the Ruger Vaquero or the Colt Python. Some types of firearms have a model number, and that number is not necessarily indicative of when the firearm was introduced. A Smith & Wesson Model 29 was not introduced in 29 AD, or in 1929. It's just a model number. Some firearms, the model number is indicative of the year they were introduced, like the Winchester Model 1894 or the Colt 1911. These types of handguns are popular today and have been popular since they were introduced well over 100 years ago. Now, this Colt government model is a 100-year model. It was made in 2011. But aside from some slightly different sights and a minor difference in the way the internals of the slide is put together, in terms of form and function, it is basically identical to the firearms that people have had for well over 100 years. My 1911 is caliber 45 ACP. They come in other calibers, but 45 is now and has always been by far the most popular. But is it powerful? Let's find out. I'm going to say yes, it is. So the 45 is powerful enough, but we're talking about handguns that can put a lot of rounds downrange. Now, these days when you buy a 1911 platform in caliber 45 ACP, it's common that they'll come with 8-shot magazines. Originally, they came with 7s. And that's what I'm using today. At 10 yards, I've got 2 targets set up, and I'll shoot them left, right, and let's see how many rounds I can put on target using 7-shot magazines. Yeah, that can put quite a few rounds downrange, but some people will say that that's still not what they'd consider a high-capacity handgun. Okay. Here's a 15-shot magazine for a 1911. And according to the sources that I've been able to look at, magazines like this were available as far back as the 1920s. And here's our targets. A 1911 in caliber .45 ACP is accurate, reliable, powerful, deadly, and they've been around for well over 100 years. But what about an old school rifle? This is an M1 carbine in caliber .30 carbine. And as rifles go, it's really not all that powerful. But is it powerful enough? I'd say yes. Well, my sincere apologies. We had a snafu, and because it's late and we're losing light, I do not have the time to correct it. What happened was, I gave a really eloquent speech about the M1 carbine, and then I did a demonstration of shooting these two targets, alternating left, right, from a distance of 25 yards, put in a cool magazine change, and then I was informed that there was a camera snafu and we didn't get it. So what you see here is shooting left, right from 25 yards, a total of 49 rounds using two 30-shot magazines. It's common that back in the old days, people would not load a magazine completely full. They downloaded a little bit to ensure proper functioning. So I loaded my 30-shot mags with 25 rounds each, and I don't like to run dry, so I still have one round. What we see here is a few flyers, and that's partially just me and partially because we're losing light. But what these two targets really show us is that the M1 carbine is accurate, reliable, powerful, deadly, high capacity, and they've been around for many decades. So, to salvage what little we can, I'll reload my mags and do at least a little bit of a shooting demonstration with it. The M1 carbine can put a lot of rounds downrange quickly, especially when you have multiple 30-shot magazines. Let me show you what I mean. I'm not going to empty the second magazine, but you get the point. Now it's really late and we're really losing light, and my apologies that we've had some snafus and that today's presentation is not as polished as they usually are, but you understand the situation. Now, on the subject of mass shootings, I'm going to say a couple of things, and they're redundant, but I want to make sure I make this clear. The 5 things that I think we can all agree on are that mass shootings occur, statistics can be manipulated, but even though those statistics can be manipulated, we're seeing a lot more mass shootings now than we saw 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. We would all like there to be a whole lot fewer mass shootings, and if we as a society do the right things, we can achieve that goal. Now, the purpose of the firearms demonstration was to show that although I don't know what the causative factors are that are causing mass shootings, I can tell you 2 things. One, the notion that mass shootings are being caused because firearms these days are so much easier to get than they were 50, 60, 70 years ago is patently false. The idea that mass shootings are occurring now because now we have access to high-capacity semi-auto firearms and 50, 60, 70 years ago we didn't is also patently false, whether we're talking about rifles or handguns. A couple of years ago, someone posited that mass shootings are occurring these days because of the presence of high-capacity semi-automatic firearms in our society. And Tom Brokaw's reply to that, quote, "No, the guns have always been there." That is a conclusion that I completely concur with. There are causative factors. We are seeing a terrible case of many mass shootings in our society these days. I do not know what the causative factors are, but I do know that it's not the presence of high-capacity firearms. Because, no, the guns have always been there. Now with that, if you've sat through the entirety of this presentation, I hope that I've helped to some degree to alleviate your holiday boredom. And I want to end with two things. One, just this morning, someone contacted me and suggested that, as a Christmas special, I do something, and he suggested the title of The 12 Deers of Christmas. Except he spelled it D-E-A-R-S. So I don't really know if he wanted to hear stories about 12 ex-girlfriends, or if he wanted to hear something about deer hunting stories. Well, I'm not going to talk about ex-girlfriends, but I will talk about one ex-girlfriend, and the only thing I'll say about that is, Wilberforce, get some professional help! But as far as having the crew talk about their favorite deer hunting stories, that does sound like a good idea for a Christmas special. I'll see what I can do. And lastly, the second thing I'd like to say is, Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.